Hello and welcome to anybody beaming in watching this. This is a conversation about leadership and innovation and AI in education. And we're hopefully going to dig into some really interesting themes during the conversation. Just by way of introduction, I'm Jamie. I'm the Executive Chairman of C Learning, a leading digital transformation specialist. And I help leaders all over the world to establish credibility with the application of leading technologies. And I get to work with organizations like Google, the RAF, and the world's leading universities and colleges, one of whom we're joined with today, and we'll come on to that in a moment. But Mark, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Mark. I'm currently the Managing Director of a Focus Training Group, providing all kinds of technical education across the southwest of the UK. In addition to that, for the last 25 plus years, I've been working in education leadership across the charitable and state further education, schools, colleges, universities, etc. And I've had a strong interest in how technology can impact teaching, learning, and assessment, but also the business and how we go about our day-to-day work and culture. And I've had the pleasure for the last few years of also working alongside C Learning and fabulous colleges like Mr. Loveday's Barton Peveril College, providing guidance and help where I can to help kind of shape the future and create best opportunities, not just for the students, but the staff and the ongoing future of the college.
Wonderful. Not a bad way to spend the day, eh? And last but not least, Chris, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Hi, Chris Loveday. I'm Vice Principal for Business Services at Barton Peveril Sixth Form College. I've worked in education for over 2 decades, even though I don't look old enough. And 17 of those years were in secondary before I moved to the post-16 sector about 2 years ago, where my career seems to have probably taken off. I've achieved more probably in 2 years than the previous 10. So, yeah, it's been a whirlwind 2 years.
And you're doing awesome stuff, Chris, some of which we're going to dig into during this this conversation. And just to add to your introduction there as well, for people watching this or reading about it afterwards, Barton Peveril Sixth Form College is one of the country's most outstanding colleges. It's also, I believe, the largest sixth form college in the country as well. And Chris, you and me first met almost randomly in a meeting I wasn't supposed to be in. And straight away, there was a certain rapport established because you are a quite remarkable leader in education. You're prepared to take big decisions, to do big things, and we'll dig into some of that today, because I think what will be of particular value to a lot of the people listening to this after is your openness and honesty about how you go about making those decisions, the challenges, what's worked, and how you've overcome some of the challenges. And you're very, very open about that. And one of the things, that's one of the things I love about your leadership style. And on that point, just before we dig into the themes we're going to be talking about today, I just thought I'd share with the audience for this that you've got a book coming out, which is called Leading the Shift, AI and the Future of Operational Excellence. And I've had the privilege of having a little bit of a preview of this, and we've had a little bit of a conversation about it. And one of the things I said to you that I love about the book is your openness and your style of how you've written it, because I think for other leaders out there, particularly across education, it's a bit different to anything else that I've seen, in that you openly share in a very honest way, without sort of softening anything, the challenges around leadership in education, especially around big decisions, because you've led some really big innovation in the last year, and we'll dig into a bit of that during the conversation. But have you got a release date for the book yet, Chris, so we know when it's coming out?
Yeah, so I'm hoping it should be out by the end of June. Pre-order available from the start of June. The manuscript's gone off to the publishing house for review. So yeah, it's really exciting time. Not something I ever thought I would do, to be brutally honest. I didn't think it would be my wheelhouse. But when we did meet about a year ago, 2 years ago, I said to you it's something I'd always wanted to do.
Brilliant.
And I think the journey we've been on presented me with a remarkable opportunity to share the insights, to be open, to be honest, and to talk about the enjoyment, the excitement, but at times the lonely nature of leadership in education or working with new technology anyway. So yeah, very, very exciting times, but yeah, nerve-wracking. I might be the worst author ever published by the time this goes out.
No, no, I think you've got nothing to be worried about. I think your writing style is engaging, it's open. It's different to other books of a similar nature that might be out there, because unlike a lot of other books that might just put forward management strategies and theories and concepts and models, you actually talk openly in the book about the kind of discussions that take place amongst senior leadership teams, the kind of not anxiety, but the difficulties when you make a big decision where there are no perfect answers and you're not 100% sure about things. And I think you sharing that openly in the way that you've done is going to be really valuable to anybody who's in a leadership role, or those who want to be, because it gives a really good insight. So Leading the Shift, AI and the Future of Operational Excellence, that is out in a couple of months, and look forward to getting a physical copy in my hands. And I'm sure people looking at this are going to want to do the same as well. So we'll push it out in a big way when it's released. But without anything further on that, let's get into the discussion today. Mark, I'm going to hand over to you to kick the conversation off, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. So, Chris, I guess you made a really good comment just then. That leadership can be quite lonely, and those discussions that Jamie just referred to, nobody can prepare you for those. You can understand the models, you can kind of practice or learn about theory and what have you. But until you get into that board situation, or you're kind of you're really experiencing it. In real time, in real terms. I don't think there's anything that can prepare you for that. So I guess we're just interested, really, and maybe this might come from later in your career now, based on what you've said. Is there like a pivotal moment in your career that really shaped your approach, where you've kind of maybe tried a few things, you've gone, do you know what? I'm never doing that again. I'm never going to open myself up in such a way, or I'm going to completely open myself up because actually I didn't get the response and I tried to please everyone, or whatever it may be. So is there a moment where kind of, that shift from being the lonely guy behind the desk went, do you know what? I've got some of this now. I can move forward.
It's really interesting because I have reflected, obviously, some of the questions ahead of time, and I have reflected, was there a moment? And I came to the conclusion that my management style was developed through years of mismanagement, in a way, either my own or other people's, where perhaps I was an employee and the treatment I received made me go, when I'm a leader, I don't want to be like that. I think that very much used to suffer from imposter syndrome. So I thought that being a good manager meant I was indispensable, that people couldn't cope without me. And one of the pearls of wisdoms that was shared with me when I was early in my career was the sign of a good manager is that they can be off and things don't stop running, that things continue as if they were there. And that is something that's a moment that resonated with me. But I think that, like everybody else that develops through management, I've made my mistakes, I've learned from them. I don't believe there's anything wrong with making a mistake professionally. I really don't. As long as it is a mistake, it's made out unintentionally, and you learn from it. That's part of development, it's part of CPD. But my entire management style has been based on trying to take people with me. I lead, I don't dictate. That's how I perceive my own style. And that's how I like to be managed. You consult the experts in the room, you take people with you. You don't create echo chambers, and the very premise is let's have a conversation. The hard part of leadership is when you agree with somebody's point of view and you still have to tell them that that's not the direction of travel. And that's the hardest part of leadership for me. It's easy to lead when things are going well and everyone's in agreement. It's really hard to lead when you're putting your head above the parapet and saying or doing something slightly different.
Yeah.
I completely agree. It's very rare, I would say, and I've listened to many debates about this. It's very rare that anybody who's going to be a leader doesn't think they're in the people business, because you could be the most technical leader in the world, you could be the most strategic, political, whatever. At the point where you don't realize you're in a people business, because we're all here because of people to either serve, support, provide services. Without the people behind it, and I've seen this at Barton Peveril, firsthand, and what an amazing place it is to go and visit. Firsthand, that the people that are there for that college are 100% there for the right reasons and to support each other, and the students and the experience and your community as well. So I completely agree.
100%. Yeah, some really interesting comments there, Chris, and I'm going to dig into a slightly sort of specific kind of question that I'd be really interested in your feedback on. And this relates to sort of a bit of self-reflection and growth, I suppose. And I'd be interested in your views on any feedback that you've had in your career that changed how you were leading or how you were making decisions. And if I share a bit of an example from my personal journey, I once had the privilege to do a quite expensive set of training with PwC, and it was around the art of difficult conversations, I think they called it. And one of the bits of advice and feedback I got as part of that process that changed how I've done everything ever since, really, is that when difficult decisions are happening or difficult conversations are happening, and of course, in any leadership role, as you've just alluded to, Chris, they're going to happen. And they're particularly difficult, like you said, when you actually maybe agree with the individual, but for various reasons, complex reasons often, there's a certain approach that has to be taken and a difficult conversation has to happen. One thing that I got by way of feedback was never, ever box someone into a corner, because the only way out of a corner is to fight. And I do love that old military quote about always building your opponent a golden bridge on which to retreat.
Yeah.
It's a nice quote. But I wondered, in your career, Chris, have you any particular feedback or lessons, so to speak, that you've learned that have changed the way that you make decisions?
So it's very, very interesting. So early on, there was a leader that told me to sweat the small stuff. And at the time, I was a bit, what you want about? But actually, as I developed through my career, understanding that it's the little things that you address that cumulatively, it's marginal gains. It's Dave Brailsford's marginal gains theory. Addressing the small things as they occur marginally has a massive impact. So that's something that definitely resonated. But again, early on, it's understanding you're not dressing or behaving for the job you've got. You've already got that. You need to dress and behave for the next one, the job you want. And it's that level of aspiration that plays a big part in helping you understand how to progress. And then finally, I think it's about having a moral compass and a position from which to work. So when I was, again, young in my career, you want to people please. You think to take people with you, you need to keep them happy. And that can often see you be more of a chameleon, i.e. move between the colours, never definitive on one output, because you want to keep everybody happy. Well, actually, it's my experience and opinion now that by having a fundamental goal, vision, style, methodology, and sticking to it, people can understand you and that approach. And it also means you are then making decisions for the same reason and the right reason, potentially, rather than adapting your decision based on the circumstance and the individual. So equity is definitely something that's essential for me in leadership.
Yeah, do you know, I was just making a few notes there while you were talking of little things you were saying, and that people-pleasing thing is an interesting one, isn't it? Whenever I'm coaching, it tends to be younger managers I'm referring to now, but a lot of younger managers need to learn the power of no.
Yes.
And they want to please and make a good impression because they want to get on their career, but so the natural inclination is to try and please people all the time. But in actual fact, it works against the individual because people don't really know where they stand with people who always want to please people. The power of no is a tremendously powerful thing. And I can't remember which film it was. It might have been a Harry Potter film where there was a quote about standing up to your friends. It's easy to stand up to your enemies. It's a lot harder to stand up to your friends. Yeah. And there's something in that, I think, in leadership. And again, I think some of that comes through in your book, by the way, which I think is really interesting. Mark, I'll let you sort of dig into a little bit about Chris and motivation and vision, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I guess, Chris, having worked alongside you and being a supporter within the college myself, you work at a phenomenal rate. It has to be said. I mean, there is a distinction with certain people, and you're very driven at achieving the best for your students and your staff. So, how do you maintain that motivation, and how do you keep your eye on the prize, really, your goal, as you say, your strategy, and you're very aware, and you're an adopter of change constantly as well. So you've got these conflicting elements, haven't you? You've got your, staying motivated, being clear about where you're going, but adapting as you go. So how do you do that?
It's a really interesting one. From a personal perspective, I think, very much have a chip on my shoulder in terms of worked very hard to be where I am, hugely aspirational. My motivation comes from, where can this go? How far can it go? So for me as an individual, I only graduated from my degree 2 years ago, currently studying for a dual master's, just written a book while doing a reasonably busy job. And that motivation definitely stems from a drive to want to fulfill all the potential I can and seize all the opportunity that's there for me. A passion for CPD. I did my certificate in school business management, straight into my diploma in school business management, straight into my AAT level 3, AAT level 4, into my degree, into my dual masters, and I'm looking at a PhD next year. So I've been embedded in real CPD for the last decade. And I've got that passion to learn, that passion to develop, that passion to grow. It'd be naive. I've got 3 decades left at work. So when you think of it in that term, it would be naive to think I know all I need to know, that I've got the skills I need to navigate a world where 3 years ago AI wasn't even in my vocabulary. That's the rate of change we're facing. So for me, it's around motivation, personal aspiration, and CPD. For the college itself, it comes from the collective vision of being in it for the right reasons. Everyone at Barton Peveril is here for the student. And it's a very beautiful culture I've never experienced a culture like it, where you can definitively say everybody's pulling in the same direction. Everybody here works hard. Nobody's got a pass. And if they did, it would stand out a mile. From the team on reception to the estate staff, the catering team, all the way up to us as leadership. We've got one of the smallest leadership teams in the country for one of the biggest colleges. Everybody here works hard. And that isn't because we're taskmasters. It's because we all have a passion about doing our best in education, about supporting young people, about giving them the best opportunities, a well-rounded education, not training them to pass an assessment, but to prepare them for the future. So I think when you combine personal motivation with professional culture and motivation, it can be quite a powerful tool. And that's certainly, I think, what perhaps I and Barton Peveril have seen in our allegiance, in our alliance. I'm the right person in the right place, possibly. And that's really helped us with transformation. I don't think that the principal expected perhaps quite the amount of change he got in the 18 months I've been here. And neither did I, to be brutally honest. But he's also he's had to slow me down, and I haven't seen the value in that previously. I'm used to working for people that want me to go as fast as I can and get as much done as quick as I can. The culture here is really different. It's not how fast you do it, it's how good you do it. And if you do it fast and you do it badly, that's terrible. If you do it fast and do it really well, good on you. But actually, it's you go as fast as you can while not jeopardizing the quality of the output.
Yeah, I would echo that comment you just made about culture as well, Chris, because I think I've said this to a number of your colleagues when I've visited the college, is that your organisation, Barton Peveril, does have quite a unique, very distinctive culture. In the conversations that Mark and myself have had with lots of your colleagues across the organisation, there's an absolute openness. There's a sort of culture of trust where people are willing to take risks and innovate and openly share things as well in terms of constructive feedback as well, which goes back to that earlier discussion about pleasing. Really, there's a very healthy openness to challenge each other at the college that I observed in the culture, which you don't see that often actually, and that's obviously, and that doesn't happen accidental as well. You mentioned working hard just now, and anybody, I know everyone on this call is aware of this, but for anyone watching who's got an interest in culture and organizational cultural development, this sort of stuff that we're talking about now doesn't happen by accident. A lot of leaders will have worked very hard for quite a long time to craft that culture that you're referring to, and of course you're taking it forward in your own way as well. So great feedback there, Chris. Mark, was there anything further from you on that particular point?
The quality, getting it right at a good pace, I think, is probably kind of the lesson there, isn't it? You don't have to go hell for leather. To take huge risks, but get in the end with a product or a service or a change that everybody's happy with. How do you think that resonates with this? You've talked about staff, and we could, like Jamie said, we've spoken to so many staff, but and I've spoken to a good number of your students as well. How do you think that filters down to the students, that all this change is happening and the college is very aspirational and where it wants to go with its academic standards, but also its use of technology and its reach into community and kind of careers and all those sorts of things? So how do you think they interpret what the college is doing?
I think that probably the best thing I could say about the way students see it is they're oblivious to it, because it happens around them, not to them. But it happens in a way that it's not, we don't emblazon our wall with suddenly we've got this accreditation or we've got that. It's a culture that they're used to. They come here and from day one, there's a culture where everything at Barton, it's outstanding. Everything, that the state of the estate, the campus itself is beautiful. The food that we serve is high quality. The teaching that we deliver in lessons is outstanding. the devices we provide to students or support students with are the best available. There's an expectation here, there's a culture, and that culture is from day one. And like you said, it's been established for a while. It's not a new culture. It's not something that's happened overnight, but there's a culture here, and that culture now is about maintaining that expectation. It's very, very interesting. Students, we renovate a building, put a new building up, start exploring AI. The students just expect that because that's the Barton Peveril way. Our customer base turns over every 2 years, which means that it's about sustaining a culture. So every year, the new intake just expect what they get, but the staff expect it as well. And the staff here, my experience is that they're harder on themselves than anyone else will ever be. They have such expectations of themselves, of their departments, of us as a leadership team. And when I first started working here, I was shocked. I didn't know if I could sustain it, if I would fit in. I wasn't used to it. Certainly wasn't used to being told to slow down or told no. And it's been intellectually one of the most stimulating periods, because I go into leadership meetings and it's never easy. There's no such thing as a fait accompli, a straightforward decision. And Barton isn't impressed by names or slogans or sums of money. Credibility, ethics, they play a massive part in everything we do. We don't align with an organization that has poor ethics. We just won't do it. Doesn't matter. We'll walk away from any negotiation or any platform. And that's the principle and the leadership team's culture. That it's got to be
fascinating, some of the things you're sharing there, Chris, and it directly sort of segues into some of the themes I want to dig into now a little bit, actually, because you are a very unusual organization, outstanding in a number of ways, a very, very special culture, as we've just touched upon a little bit. And I want to dig into a little bit about your sort of mental framework or formal framework for decision making and how some of those processes happen, because one of the ways we met, and this is something that has carried on ever since that we've known each other, is you've always been making very big decisions about very bold moves in education to be at the forefront of what you're doing. And in the context of how we got to know each other, it was about technology we were talking about, which is often what I'm getting involved with as a chairman of a leading Google partner. And in your particular college, you have done everything that can reasonably be done to ensure you're constantly in the vanguard of innovation. In this particular case, you were leading last year the largest rollout of Gemini AI in the world, not just in the UK, and I think not even in just education, I think globally in the world, full stop. That's a pretty big badge to have. And since that time, with the work that me and Mark and colleagues have done with you guys over at Barton Peveril, you've continued to lead these really big innovations, whether it's moving everything to the cloud or changing the infrastructure of the organization to deliver the best possible experience for students and anybody else, including business stakeholders or all the staff as well. You've developed really innovative, I don't know if you call it a chatbot, but the Barton Buddy integration with your systems is, again, pioneering work, working with external companies who are the best in the world at what they do. You're also very, very commercially minded. That's one of the things I said to you when I first met you, Chris. I said, gosh, you're an unusual person to meet in the public sector because you have a very, very commercial brain. So you sort of have a really good way of finding who is the best to work with for a given thing that you're doing. And you mentioned this in your book as well about the power of cross-pollinating your thinking with external people, whether it's companies, whether it's other stakeholders or people across education, which I think is part of your success, actually. But what are your thoughts and reflections on the decision-making process that you talk about quite openly in your book about the big decisions, like, for example, being #1 for Gemini in the world, for example? That's quite a bold move. That can't have been an easy decision. What were some of the challenges around the decision-making process?
It wasn't easy, and don't get me wrong, it helps that we're a large college, so economies of scale. We're really lean. We run at about 60% staffing to income. So that's very, very low in education. You're typically more around the 70 to 80%. So we're really low. And that speaks to the everybody works hard. So that helps us. But the reality is, I'd like to say that I'm using Porter's 5 forces model, or I'm doing PESTLES and SWOTs left, right, and centre. And don't get me wrong, when the big things come around, they're tools I do go to. Certainly something like understanding the macro environment and how it might have an impact. AI, we understood that the emergence of artificial intelligence in the macro environment would eventually have a knock-on effect to us as an educational institution. That's where that started from, and it was the principal's visionary leadership that brought that about. The reality is, and the more I reflect on it, the more I agree with this statement. We don't do what we do based on models, mechanisms, or anything. What we do is we make a decision based on our values and our strategic plan. Now, I've worked in a number of educational establishments where you produce strategic plans that nobody reads, and once a year you dust them off and get it back out. And we were going to focus on boys. Do you remember? Yeah, we better focus on boys again. You know, that type of thing. Barton Peveril was unusual. It's got a strategic plan, but it's a meaningful one that they actually refer to. Not the staff. The estates team don't get out the strategic plan and talk about the values or the aims and objectives. But the leadership team do, and one of them is around the student and doing everything we can for the student, which sounds very, very simple, but it's often overlooked. So when we were looking at artificial intelligence, it was, how does this impact the student? Now, on one hand, it's teaching and learning. On the other, it's preparing them for a world where artificial intelligence, particularly generative AI, is going to be prevalent. It's also about making sure that they understand the efficacies of it, the biases, the implications. So everything we do comes back to our values, about educating young people, preparing them for the future, and also upskilling and developing and sustaining a staff workforce. And technology is a big part of that. I mentioned in my book the arrival of the interactive whiteboard, which still gives me nightmares. That they soon adorned the wall of every classroom up and down the country, and most children had a pen in their bedroom, but a teacher could never find one for love nor money. It's the most expensive projector screen the government has ever seen invested in.
Yeah.
That was education running to embrace a technology that was going to revolutionise, transform education. It didn't. What it did was revolutionise budgets and transform surpluses into deficits.
100%. Just on that point, Chris, a former principal of mine at a college I used to be a director in, on that exact point, he used to say to me, when we're thinking about decisions like technology or whatever, he uses the example of the digital boards that ended up on the walls of every classroom and said, do you ever feel like all we changed was we got rid of the chalk dust?
Yeah. This created another problem, didn't you?
Yeah.
That's what happened. So when we're making big decisions here, we try to just dial it back, to go back to the values, go back to the principle, and look for that. So we've started to put interactive TVs on the estate. We've paused it now. Well, what's the impact of that investment? Is it having a meaningful impact on teaching and learning? Is it significantly improving the student experience? Because if it isn't, then they're not worth $4,000 a pop.
Yeah.
So it's about understanding that.
Yeah, 100%. Fascinating. I've made a few notes again there. Mark, I'll let you ask the next one.
So the next bit's about, and I know you're passionate about this, and this is a big driver for your strategy going forward, is about data. So, and data-driven leadership. So how do you use data to inform your decisions on a weekly basis or on a kind of academic cycle termly, especially when we're talking about, your another big passion of yours, which is around digital equity and the adoption of AI. So how's data helping you kind of either evaluate or make those decisions in the first place?
So principally, we as humans will have biases, whether conscious or unconscious. And, the conscious ones are the easy ones because they're there. It's the unconscious ones you don't. We can use instinct, and we do as leaders, we always do. An instinct has its place. But instinct alone can't be a rationale for a decision. It can't be the measure, the metric that you go by. So data gives you, typically, the impartial view. That's the reality of what data can do. So, for example, Jamie mentioned Barton Buddy. So I could sit here and say that it's revolutionised the student experience, but the data tells me, well, it hasn't. What it's done is, for the students that engage with it, it's a very good tool. But only for the ones that have engaged with it. It's about 59% of students actively use Barton Buddy. Now, we're not screaming about transformation there. What we're saying is, we created a tool. I thought it'd be more successful than that. But actually, what it's done is shown us some learning experiences in the journey, but equally started to give us some data analytics that stopped me saying it's revolutionised Barton Peveril, because the data tells me it hasn't. what it's done is it's made a change for those students that are engaging. And I think that's very, very important. The Gemini licenses, we could scream we're the world's biggest procurer of Gemini. And that is a badge to wear. But the question that somebody would ask is, okay, what did that do? What's the impact of that? And at the moment, it's very, very difficult for anyone to have meaningful insight into the impact of technology or artificial intelligence. Anyone that claims that interactive TV has improved student progress, how have they litmus tested that? What benchmark have they used? What analytic of progress have they had to measure it? AI, we can tangibly tell you that some of our tools have saved us 300 labour hours. Now, for that one tool, that's a very good metric. 300 labour hours in our infrastructure and estate is nothing. So we use data to make sure we don't get giddy and run off celebrating huge wins or victories, when actually what they are is small wins or small victories. And vice versa, that we don't bash ourselves over the heads with failures or see something as not being successful, unless the data tells us it's not successful. So it's really important metric. Now, you touched on my passion. You know this one's my passion with digital equity. So I see at the moment education an inflection point. So COVID demonstrated to us that we've got a bit of an issue here with digital equity. I remember working in a really good secondary school at the time, and we asked students, first lockdown, who's got a device? 80% ticked yes. Great, we only need to sort 20% out. When we came back, what we discovered was at the first lockdown, the 80% were either A, using a mobile phone, or B, sharing a device, or C, had a great device but no Wi-Fi. Well, actually, we asked the wrong questions. For the second lockdown, we asked the harder questions. What we found was we had insufficient devices. We had insufficient Wi-Fi connectivity. So when we got ourselves to a point where we could cater for that, the next step was digital literacy. There's a myth that the students of today are digital natives. They are. They're Facebook natives or Instagram natives or mobile phone natives. They aren't natives at producing PowerPoints, writing emails, or academic research. So digital equity is about making sure that we give every young person a device, connectivity, the digital skills to use them safely. And the fourth piece to that puzzle now is something like a large language model. You give a student a laptop, the internet, and ChatGPT paid account. That isn't a divide anymore over a student that doesn't have those three things. That's a chasm. That's a life-changing opportunity compared to that other student. So now it's about giving them access to that kind of high-powered, sophisticated tool as well. But the final piece to that comes back to that digital literacy, because it's making sure they don't think the answer that comes out of an LLM is the answer, that it's definitively accurate, making sure they understand that they have to stress test, quality assure, reference check the data that's come out of it to make sure that it's accurate and meaningful. So the digital equity, I actually see it getting worse, not better, because typically a lot of young people associate all AI as a large language model, because Snap AI, Meta AI, ChatGPT, they don't understand AI has been around since 1940. The generative AI is just one function, and commercial LLMs are only sort of breaking the ground in the last year. So that education piece now is vital for that digital equity.
Yeah, do you know, 100%. I've just made a whole bunch of notes from what you were saying there, Chris, and your passion comes through the screen when it comes to digital equity. I think we could do an entirely separate session just on digital equity, actually, because there's so much to unpick in that. And in particular about, I've always been interested in some of the unintended consequences of what looks like a good idea. And I see a lot of that potentially with AI. So there is a lot of, well, there's a whole other topic we won't go into today, but there is a whole bunch of issues, as you know, around the perhaps unintended consequences of technology and what some people are doing to try and make it safer, and so we can use these tools wisely. And you're absolutely right, in my personal subjective opinion, about the criticality of having access to use these tools responsibly and in a healthy, productive way that has meaning and value. Because if we don't equip young people to use these tools wisely and in a way that transforms their lives, then they're going to be at such a disadvantage, aren't they, in the world that we're in? Which kind of brings me, again, segues into what I wanted to dig into next, really, which was about, in your decision-making process, if we were just to pick on the decision aspects of the equity that you were just talking about, and how do you ensure that diverse voices and opinions and perspectives are included in your decision-making process? Because you're in a very senior role. It'd be very easy for you to just make big decisions and go, right, doing this, and issue it as a directive. But you already said earlier on that that's definitely not how you work. Do you want to share a little bit about the process that you go through to ensure a sort of more collegiate approach that informs your decision-making processes, and what steps you might take to create, sort of enhance that culture where everyone would feel safe to tell you what they think?
Yeah, I think unfortunately the rest of the leadership, the composition of our leadership team is very, very good. So we've got a diverse leadership team who think from a very, very good moral compass, ethical compass. So that helps us certainly from the beginning. But the reality is it always comes back to the student. It's about understanding that we aren't always the experts in the room. So a prime example of that is when artificial intelligence was given to me as a project, I speak passionately about knowing nothing about AI. You know, it was given to me as a project. I can manage projects. I don't know anything about artificial intelligence. So I didn't assume that my decision or my instinct was the right one, because I was the inexperienced or the uneducated in that subject. So actually relying on the experts, understanding stakeholder opinion. Don't consult when it's not a consultation. That's something that I'm passionate about. You know, don't ask somebody to vote on a fait accompli and then be shocked if it's the wrong answer. You do it to them. So I think that we as a leadership team sometimes have to take decisions, and that's part of being a leader. They're taken for the right reason, with a holistic view, having been dissected by the team. And where we need to or can, we will consult and get a broader view and a broader perspective. I think that's essential. There was my principal went to a leadership meeting at Apple, and Apple talk about a rock grinder polishing the stone. So you don't put 100 stones in and try and polish them all. You put the one that you want in, and then you polish that one to the finished product. So if you think about someone like Apple, that's what they do. They don't release the iPhone every 3 months. They release one, they get that one right, they release it. They're already working on the next one somewhere else, but the one they're focusing on is that one. That's the principle here. You know, we polish the stone. So that's why our leadership meetings are challenging. That's why there is no fait accompli. There's no easy decision to be taken, because you don't get to leadership typically because you're a shrinking violet and you don't have an opinion. Not typically why you're in leadership. So you can get leadership teams where you just can't agree because of that. But you can also get the productive, constructive ones like ours where we can agree. But it's we get there in a uniformed, collegiate way.
Yeah. I echo that. Yeah, there's so much we could dig into with some of the things that you're mentioning here, because there's a number of key elements to what you were just describing. And I mean, leadership as a role in itself can be a very lonely road at times as well. And we won't dig into it today, but a separate conversation I'd love to have with you is around how you look after yourself, so to speak, as a senior leader, and your networks and the role that they play. But the bits I want to dig into today, just in a bit more detail, building on what you were just saying, really, actually, Chris, was there a particular moment that sort of inspired you in the case of Barton to sort of champion AI and to do this big, bold move, in your case with Gemini, but also with other technologies that you're using as well? But was there a particular moment that inspired you to do that? And I'll share with you a moment from my sort of recent last couple of years. You know, back when ChatGPT was a brand new thing, for me, it was a person who's got quite a high profile, who's probably known to all of us on this call, Mr. Dan Fitzpatrick, best-selling author and long-term friend, came to me and sort of said, "Have you seen this?" And I looked at it and probably did what most people did, which is go, "This cannot be real. This can't be doing what it appears to be doing." Got ridiculously excited, like a kid in a toy shop. And that for me was a moment where my mind, as it often does, went off into 1,000 possible variables of the future. And I just knew that if I was back running a college again, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I don't know how this is going to play out. I don't have the answers, but I know it's going to be big. Did you have a similar moment, or was it different for you.
So
And,
sorry, it's really interesting that the principal called a single item leadership meeting around AI. Now, I went into that meeting thinking, what the hell are we going to talk about? What is AI? And again, I cover this a bit in the book, but it was one of the most intellectually rich, exciting, challenging leadership meetings I've ever experienced, because we had everything from the cautious, the ethics, the bias, to the optimistic, the excited, and everything in the middle of that spectrum. And I remember sitting in the room thinking, Jesus Christ, I feel sorry for whoever they give this to. I've only been there for 3 months. I didn't think for 1 second they were going to give it to me. And the principal did. He gave it to me. He thought it'd be something for me to get my teeth into. And I walked out of that room thinking, you don't know what you've just done. And I have a professional fear of failure. I don't give me something and expect me to do it badly or half-heartedly. I take pride in what I do, and I want to be seen as having done it well. And the minute he gave it to me, he made a rod for his own back, because that's how I approach things. I won't do it badly. I will only do it well. But equally, new job, keen to make a good impression, excited by the opportunity that had just been given to me. And I immersed myself in AI, if I'm really honest, because I still know nothing, but I knew even less then. And I immersed myself in what is this and what could it do?
Yeah.
And actually, it's only when you start to look at the capabilities that excitement then builds, that you can then start to take it to the next level. So I started to use a large language model for my job. And then suddenly I found that things that were taking me hours were taking me less than that. And then, I wonder if I could do this in it. And, I can. And then I stopped becoming an academic that writes everything, more a custodian of knowledge, where I was shaping, a good prompt will give you a substantial document from which to build. And sometimes for me, sitting with that blank paper was the hardest bit. I genuinely hate somebody saying to me, do this. I don't. How can you give me an idea of what you'd like to see? The blank bit of paper was always the hardest bit. The book, I had a journal of my journey with AI, predominantly because I thought when it goes wrong, I'll look back and think, why did I make that decision, or how did I get to this juncture? So I was sort of recording. When I thought, okay, maybe I should publish this or have a go at it, I put my notes predominantly into a large language model to help me structure a book. Because sitting down with a blank piece of paper, where do I start? When I got an outline, that was it. The rest came easy because it was regurgitating my knowledge, my experience, my feelings, linking it to the academic references.
Yeah.
But for me, I think the big wow moment was when I realised that how good a large language model is and the potential it would have. But that conversely was also the big scare moment, because I also understood how big this could be and the impact it could have. 100%. So yeah, it was a double-edged sword, definitely.
Yeah, 100%. I can relate so much to that. And I don't know about you guys, but I've continued to have wow moments ever since, really. Like, I not long ago, I remember starting to learn more about the multimodal capabilities of AI. And I remember being in an American diner cafe with one of my colleagues as we were traveling back from being with a client. And I said, look at this, because we were looking at the menu and there's about 50 different burgers on this American diner menu. And I just took a photo of it on my phone, put it into Gemini and said, make a recommendation as to the healthiest option on this menu. And I thought at best it was going to, demonstrate it can see the picture and come back with that burger there because I can see the calories in it. But it went much further than that. And it said, well, if you order that's particularly healthy. But if you swap that bun for that particular bun there, then you'll knock another 300 calories off the meal. And I was like, seriously? It was just another insight into how advanced all of this is getting. And your point as well about getting AI tools to help with putting, in your case, a book together, but also other research and things like that. Oh my gosh, it's become an essential tool for me with things like that. And the latest Gemini deep research model as well, by the way, if you get a chance to play with that is just off the charts in terms of the academic rigor that it will now apply to the sources and references and everything it brings back. Remarkable stuff. Just one further point on this one before I hand back to Mark to dig into a few aspects of how you navigate challenges. is, and this kind of relates to what Mark's going to probably ask you about in a minute, is I'm interested in sort of how you, in your leadership style, approach overcoming resistance to change and challenges you might get, because you lead big things all the time and big change. And as you've already said throughout this conversation, Barton is always moving at 1,000 miles an hour to be at the forefront of innovation that has impact. You're bound, it's human nature sometimes in an organization the size of yours, you're bound to get a few people who are like, oh, this is scaring me a bit. This is, I'm a little bit nervous about this. Any particular insights you'd share around how you overcome that, or how you approach those people who might be a little bit more resistant than others around change?
I think empathy is a massive part of it. So understanding the reasons why people may feel that way. Change is something that in education often gets done to us rather than done with us. So having a clear consultation if possible, but making it clear that it's to everyone why you're doing something. The fact that everything we do here typically comes back to the students, it's very hard to argue against it. But we also model the behaviours we expect to see from our staff. So a prime example, you guys facilitated a load of training here for the use of GEMS or Gemini within docs and sheets. Every member of leadership attended the same training sessions as every other staff that was invited to attend them, because we want to learn like everybody else. Yeah. We aren't the experts in the room. We don't do things to the staff. We give them an opportunity to. We haven't forced AI onto our staff. We have staff here who I suspect won't use it, and that's totally okay. But what we've done is, for the ones that want to use it, we've given them the skills, the safety, and the guidance to use it in a way that's meaningful. So for me, change management is something that's inevitable, but as long as it's done for the right reasons, empathetically, with good communication, typically the vast majority of your staff will go along with you if you're doing it for the right reasons and you're communicating well.
Great advice. Yeah, superb. No further questions, Your Honour. Mark, over to you.
So specifically when you're introducing these changes, then maybe if you could give an example of a particular innovation or something you really wanted to deliver, can you talk about any challenges that you've, specific challenges around introducing the AI that you can share with the rest of the world? Whether it's Barton Buddy, you put together a whole suite of AI agents. I think at my last came scene, it was almost 15, which is, when you said just a second ago, you've been in post 18 months, I sort of shuddered. And then I wasn't surprised, having met you several times. But yeah, how did you overcome? So what was the challenges? How did you overcome that? And any insights?
Look, the reality is that you don't even need to go as deep as launching an agent. The myth busting for AI was something that we needed to do. AI now still gets bad press for its carbon emissions, the amount of water it takes to cool the data centers, the impact it's having on the global scale, the fear of super artificial intelligence. The media can often have an adverse effect on the way we perceive things. And if we rewind 18 months to when we were starting to explore this, it was worse. There were examples of Gemini trying to overcome the biases that were built into it. So created a Nazi image with, black Nazis or disabled Nazis, which clearly factually was incorrect because they were trying to overcome the biases. So when we started to explore AI, we needed to make it clear to people that this wasn't about reducing headcount, because again, the scaremongering at the time was all people are going to lose their jobs. We're going to live in this dystopian world where AI writes the homework, AI marks the homework, and a human never leaves the house. So having to say to people, look, it's not about reducing headcount. This is about tackling our workflow issues. Education is, again, struggling to recruit support staff and retain them, because you can go and earn more money being a barista and get moaned at a hell of a lot less by angry parents being a barista. So the reality is we had to make sure that we explained to staff we weren't doing it to them, we were doing it with them. We weren't doing it in spite of them, we were doing it for them, and that they could come with us and help us shape it. And that's been an essential part of our journey. We haven't imposed artificial intelligence or AI-based solutions on our staff. We've invested in solutions to help them do their jobs. If they actively want to engage with them, that's great. And I think that culture that we have here, where the students first, where everyone operates with integrity, with honesty and transparency, has helped, because nobody nobody believed that we were lying. We weren't deceiving people. When we said this wasn't about reducing numbers, staff knew it wasn't about reducing staff numbers. So I think when you're trying to address concern, it's about empathizing with the concern, where it's come from, and then dispelling it or not. So, we have to be transparent. Yeah, AI produces a lot of carbon emissions. AI, it's very, very bad. Somebody told me that a data center uses the same energy and water as Belgium. I don't know if that's factually correct, but I don't disbelieve it. So the reality is, what are we going to do to offset that? Because we say, yeah, we're aware that AI generates a lot of carbon. So what we have aspirations to be net zero, but we're trying to offset that carbon through ground source heat pumps in the new buildings, solar panels on the buildings, rainwater toilet systems. We are trying to offset, but we're not blindly just pushing artificial intelligence out there. We're saying, okay, we're aware we're using it, so let's make a concerted effort to try to reduce our carbon emissions to offset that.
Yeah, I think a key part of that as well, Chris, is that myth busting that you were talking about earlier, because you also mentioned how the media and certain vested interests jump on certain disruptive things, always with hysteria almost, and I was looking at some analysis recently that was looking at things like carbon emissions as it relates to AI. But if you look at it objectively and pull yourself out of some of the hysteria and what the media likes to jump on, well, it's like the least bad guy when it comes to carbon emissions out there compared to other technologies. So, for example, it is dwarfed by the carbon emissions generated by cryptocurrency, for example. Yeah. Absolutely dwarfed by it. So,
airplane travel.
Absolutely, exactly, yeah. And also, people don't often look at the bigger picture stuff, the wider variables, like, for example, whether the company that provides the platform, if we're talking about Google, for example, I know you already know this, but for anybody watching, they've been carbon neutral since 2007 and will be net zero within a relatively modest time frame. So, and also they're vast producers of renewable energy and have the greenest sort of cloud technology in the world. And many other companies are doing really cool things as well. So if you have to look at it in the much bigger picture in the round. But one thing I will say about your organization, again, whilst we're talking about things like sustainability in the context of what we're talking about right now, is it really is a value that runs through your organization as well. It's a very real thing. And I think that is something that you can feel about Barton Peveril as well as an organization, is that the values are authentic rather than something in a document that's put away in a cabinet somewhere. A lot of organizations claim to have values, but it's interesting when they're tested just how much they stand up to.
We developed a lot of our tools, and another tech provider was very interested in engaging with us, and we didn't want to work with them. And don't get me wrong, at the time I was excited. I would have worked with them. The principal was not interested in working with them because their moral compass, their sustainability agenda, their tax, payments meant that they weren't a company he wanted to engage with. The reason we have been able and are happy to engage with Google is they have aspirations to be carbon neutral. They are working harder than most to that position. So when I talk about the ethics and the values here, they aren't tokenistic. We only work with sustainable companies unless they give us a bigger check. And that for me was quite an interesting point to experience, because my experience historically is everybody's got a moral compass until the right numbers dropped. Here, the moral compass is the moral compass regardless of the number. And that was something that was refreshing, exciting, reassuring. Completely our values entrench what we do.
Yeah, before I totally echo that, and you can feel it as well. And before I hand over to Mark again, just to ask a few things, I just want to dig into how you sustain this momentum we've been talking about a little bit, because as Mark was just saying previously, in the time we've known you alone, you have really sort of blazed a trail, if I can put it that way, for a whole range of big initiatives, technology and wider, and that takes some serious effort to sustain. And as part of that, I'd sort of be interested in how you manage that personally, sustaining that, because I also know you on a personal level and know that you work incredibly hard. I mean, by any measure, you are a seriously hard-working individual, probably because you love what you're doing is what I suspect, because you're very passionate, and that comes through even in this conversation, obviously. But how do you sustain it? And also, given the immense speed that you work by any measure, I mean, especially in the public sector of education, but even in the commercial world, you would be considered to be somebody who moves at a rapid rate. How do you sort of make sure that when you're moving that fast, that it's inclusive? Because you've talked about equity and how important that is to you. And I suppose I'm thinking about the diversity of teams and people. Not everybody's going to be able to work as fast as you, for example, Chris. Any thoughts and reflections from a leadership point of view on how you make sure you're inclusive in that sense of taking people with you when you're moving at 1,000 miles an hour?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I've often reflected on how I can achieve so much. And I go back to my wife's point. That's because I don't have a life.
Yeah, follow Chris for other leadership tips.
yeah. So the reality is, I am quite restless. I like to be intellectually stimulated. I have motivation and aspiration. Definitely, I have goals I want to fulfill. But when you love what you do as well, that does. When I'm at home and I'm reading books on AI or reading research papers on AI, that's not me working. I enjoy that. That's my hobby. My hobby and my work now align, and that's something that's very, very refreshing. I probably would burn myself out if I didn't have a leadership team around me, like my boss, who made me take a holiday when I was saying I don't need it. He was like, "Well, I'm thinking you do," and in hindsight, I possibly did. Not that I'd tell him that. So yeah, it's I don't know when necessarily to stop or slow down. So that's something that I'm trying to develop. But I'm passionate about what I do. I enjoy what I do. When I say to people that in the last year I've done a dual masters, that I'm currently on course to get a distinction in both. I've written a book, I've developed or co-developed 18 bespoke agents while doing a day job. People kind of go, "What?" And when I say it, even I go, "Geez, that's a lot." But the reality is, I work efficiently, I work smartly, and I also, in terms of my staff, I have different expectations for them. So my IT manager, you know him well, I tell him to stop working. I tell him to take a break. I don't expect him to go at my pace. There was a great example where he had to push back because I wanted to go at a pace that was too quick for them to technically do it and do it efficiently and safely. But I had the understanding, the nous, the expertise to listen to the expert in the room. So there are times when people tell you it can't be done, and it can. But typically it's knowing when those times are, but trusting the people you work with. I don't expect my team, I want my teams to take a break. I want my teams to slow down. I'll never ask my teams to work out their hours, to do more than is their role. But I don't have those same rules for myself. But I have more aspiration for myself possibly than I do others. So for me, it's just about trying to be the best I can and do the best job I can.
Some great bits of wisdom in that, actually. When you were talking now, Chris, you reminded me of a quote somebody said to me, who's one of my coaches and mentors, and they said to me that where purpose meets passion, it equals happiness. And when you describe no difference between your hobby and sort of what you do, which I can relate to on a personal level, because that's very similar to me, because I'm just curious and I'm always learning. I'm just kind of obsessed with learning, really. Then it doesn't ever feel like work, does it? But also you do always sometimes have to take a bit of a break. But fascinating, some real interesting insights from you there, Chris. Mark, I'll hand back to you for the next bit.
Just to circle back on some of just what's been said again, just to a couple of things that impressed me, Chris, with you and your leadership team, which I think have probably helped shape your journey from the beginning, was what was very clear is the reason that you were doing it wasn't to reduce headcount from staff. That was a really strong message. And then the way you didn't have to sell it, because there's no, so you don't, when it's benefit to students, you don't have to sell it, do you? You really don't. And it was, we're going to amplify all of the good stuff we can do with our students face to face. And it was moving resource. It wasn't about, and at that time, AI was getting a lot of bad press. And there were leaders of similar organizations to yours who couldn't guarantee that the adoption of AI wouldn't reduce headcount. and they were openly saying that in public forums, and I found it really interesting. And that's what felt good about coming to work with you for that period of time and do that piece of work with you, because value on a value basis, that really resonated with me personally. Which brings me neatly onto this next question, which is, how do you go about selecting your partners? Because I've been in your position. I've had IT budgets to kind of balance. I've had investments and innovation to achieve. And you've got an interesting partnership with ASUS who are helping with digital equity. How do you select your partners, knowing that that's the best fit for Barton Peveril? I'm building on what you said around the net zero.
So it's really, really interesting because sort of Jamie alluded to it at the start, that I think more commercially minded than typically most people in my role in education. And I do pride myself on that I'm more entrepreneurial than typically the sector is used to. But I'm also possibly more passionate. So I talk, and this as partners, I talk about partnerships. I'm not looking for transactional relationships. I don't want a one-off, I'm going to buy 10 Chromebooks from you for a price and I'm going to haggle for a better price for this one, and I'm going to go to another provider next week. I look for partnerships. I look to say, look, we like what you sell. You like that we buy it. Let's be efficient. We still have to test value for money, but the premise here is it's about working with people. And my experience is we're public sector. We're funded publicly. If we go to somebody and point out that we're diligent, we are frugal, we're careful with our money, and we aren't going to throw it after the shiny toys, we're going to buy something meaningful, and that we have a compass that's ethically shaped and morally guided, then typically people want to work with you. We give back. So I speak at events on behalf of ASUS. I've spoken at events on behalf of C Learning. It's about sharing the partnership. It's not about a transactional one-time thing. Networking is everything. I firmly believe that. ASUS, that was me being pie in the sky. I said to Charlie, I want to get a load of free Chromebooks to give to students who can't afford them, get hold of all our suppliers and see what you can do. I ended up on a random call with ASUS. If I was honest, I was tired. It was late in the afternoon. I went, I'm just going to cut to the mustard here. I said to them in 10 minutes, I'm passionate about digital equity, pretty much the speech I've just given you about the 4 pillars for me of digital equity. I said, I can provide the literacy skills, I can provide the large language model, if you can provide the internet and the device. And they said, okay. And ultimately, they were messaging Charlie in the background going, cool, this guy's passionate. We believe on what he said. Now, they donated the best part of £200,000 worth of USB dongles, data and devices over a 3-year period. We would have bought them anyway. ASUS are our principal manufacturer of devices that we use. They knew we would have bought them anyway, but they understood the mission that we were trying to deliver. That in education, typically you loan a student who can't afford a device, and they give it back to you. Well, what good's that if they're going to go into university? So they give it back to us in the June or the July, and then in the September, October, they're trying to get a new one from the university. And it may not be the same OS, for example. Maybe it was a Microsoft laptop and now it's a Google Chromebook, or vice versa. Whereas for me, it's about, let's just empower the student. Let's give them what they need to talk. Don't loan it to them, because then they don't own it. There's not that sense of ownership there. It's not that sense of it's mine. It's not a gift, is it? Then it's a loan. So I think that passion came off with ASUS and academia. But typically, I find you benefit most from economies of scale, from open dialogue. I say to everybody that I meet from a procurement perspective, I want your best price. I'm looking for a partnership. But they get a loyalty from me as well. I'm loyal to them. I'll be reference sites. But don't get me wrong, I don't lie. If they're loyal to me and give me crap service, then I'll tell everybody that as well. Yeah. But most people don't give you bad service. Most people intentionally want to give you a good service, and they'll do their best. And I'm open and honest about that. I relate to the people I work with on a human level. Get on with both of you brilliant on a human level. That makes it easier. And I'm sure there are people that work with me that can't stand me, but they get on with me from a professional level. So it's part and parcel. It's part of the course. But when selecting a partner, they need to fit your ethical pillars. But ultimately, they need to want to work with you as well, and that often comes across.
100%.
So just on that, when you've got that technology and the adoption, How are you looking at that in terms of translating it into the meaningful outcomes that you're looking for? What success look like to you in that regard?
I mean, in terms of digital equity, success looks like every student having access to the skills at the 4 pillars. That's success. We aren't there yet. We're developing a digital literacy qualification so that we can address that pillar. We are going to roll out free access to a premium large language model to all our students. So it doesn't matter if you can afford a ChatGPT or Gemini account, they've got access to a premium LLM. It will be our own one with the enhanced safeguards, so we can say we can do it safely. You know, you're not going to get answers on drugs, pornography, misogyny, violence. So it's a safer access to a large language model. So success to me looks like making a difference and a meaningful difference. I don't think we at Barton will be satisfied, because I don't think we'll ever get 100% of students where we want them to be, but we'll keep pushing for that. So that's success. To not lose your passion, your vision over time, to not let it temper or water down, to keep striving for the same idealistic goals.
Brilliant. Love that. Yeah, that's a quote in itself, Chris. Yeah, great answer. From me, I just want to dig into the human aspect to this a little bit. So I know that from the work I do with Google, that they've got a publicly available principles statement, if you can call it that, of how they develop AI, for example, which is their sort of approach to providing an ethical framework around the safe and secure development of these very powerful technologies that without these ethical frameworks could be problematic in lots of ways, I think. And what that speaks to for me is about putting the human in the loop of the process and making sure that people are at the core of what we're doing. And you've spoken several times during this conversation actually about people and student focus and the people elements of how you work and how the organization you're part of works. And I just wondered sort of what your thoughts might be on, do you have a formal process about how you keep the human in the center of like your big innovations around AI? Where was that in your decision-making process about making sure that people were the focus rather than getting very excited by the tech, if you know what I mean?
Yes. So look, our governance certainly for artificial intelligence is robust. Now, no one person has autonomy. So although I might be the strategic lead for artificial intelligence here, I don't make any isolated decisions. Everything goes via the leadership team, and it's debated. Now, the beauty of that is, and again, I do mention this in the book, it kept me grounded. It stopped me being bamboozled and dazzled by the shiny golden egg and running down the rabbit hole. It kept pulling me back to what's in it for Barton Peveril, what's best for the student. Where's the human in this?
Yeah. So
I think there are times when one person can have too much autonomy, and then you can start to lose the human-centric approach. Our methodology meant that the humans were always in the discussion. We also, from the outset, felt that we didn't want AI to make any meaningful judgment. So you've got to rewind 18 months. You know, we didn't have the EU. We didn't have the guidance coming out of America or the guidance coming from the Department for Education that we're starting to see. There was nothing at that point. So that was quite a scary, lonely place in that regard, because we could go off half-cocked potentially and do things that either down the line we regretted or were wrong or inappropriate. Thankfully, because we had that human-centered approach that meant no one person could make a decision, it meant that everything was always coming back to a group of individuals who explored it from the different lenses and perspectives that they had, meaning it stayed human-centric.
That's great. You're sort of touching upon some points I'm going to hand over to Mark to dig into in a bit more detail now around leadership in the AI era that we're all in. And you sort of nicely segued into that, because I think there are some very interesting emerging themes around this. Mark, I'll hand back to you.
So just on that, Chris, I guess it's kind of those ethical considerations, because we were there together, weren't we, 18 months ago, and there wasn't a lot out there. Google had a framework, and that was a good starting place, and I think you wisely pinned your initial kind of approach to it on those things. So in terms of ethically managing this for the next 2 to 3 years, what strategy have you got? How are you going to keep coming back and going, right, okay, we've tested this, we're keeping our students as safe as we possibly can, and we've got everybody we need to do that. What does that look like at Barton Peveril?
I think for me, it's the same values-led approach. So keeping the student at the center of it, or the student experience, making sure that we never take the human out of the loop. The final decision should always be the human. It's about using AI to solve the problems where AI lends itself. AI is brilliant at data analysis or optical character recognition. So use it for those strengths. Don't give it autonomy to mark and grade a student's work without quality assuring it, and give them predicted grades based on that potentially shape their future life by not being accepted into a university because AI said so. So it's making sure that we never ever put artificial intelligence as a barrier to the human. It should be there to amplify the human, not replace it. And that is principally one of our values that guides what we do. We are, everything we've done conforms to the EU AI Act, even though it doesn't apply to us, because there isn't anything in the UK that governs it in regard yet. We're using as they emerge, we're using the frameworks that present themselves as a metric, as a measure. It's not a bad litmus test if you've got that. So I think everything we do now is about scaling in a sustainable way, in a meaningful way, but not losing the values that have led us to be where we are, because clearly so far they've been effective.
Knowing that you've got that in place, and again, it comes across in reams when you talk about this and how you position yourself and how you've led on it. What excites you about AI? What do you see the future potential? Because we don't know what the answer is, but you must have some strong inklings of what you would like to achieve from it.
I genuinely am excited by the opportunities that AI present for education. I've heard the philosophical personal tutor in every child's pocket argument, and I disagree. Look, the British infrastructure isn't there. Our schools have a mixture of Apple, Google and Microsoft. Most don't have fibre running to every building. They have a mixture of on-prem and cloud servers. Our digital infrastructure is not there. Our digital literacy is not there. But actually, what it can do in education is start to free the teacher up. I can see marking and assessment being revolutionised. I've used that word that I try to avoid, revolutionised by AI. I can see that making the teacher more available to support the student in a one-to-one way. I can see some of the administrative burden around SEND, access arrangements, exam concessions starting to be addressed meaningfully by AI to free the human up to be able to support the student. I think AI has an opportunity to be transformational in a way that makes it human, contactable, available, and supportive of the students in the room. That excites me. To see, data entry jobs disappear wouldn't be a bad thing. Okay, it won't be great for the people doing data entry jobs, but perhaps there'll be other opportunities. But repetitive tasks that could be completed autonomously to free a human up might mean that someone somewhere gets access to a human. So I think there's an exciting opportunity ahead of us.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that sort of segues into a number of key themes, I think, that relate again to equity, which we touched upon several times during this conversation, because I mentioned earlier about thinking sometimes about the unintended consequences of technology. Well, one of the unintended consequences of technology, you mentioned data entry there. So if you're doing a data entry as a role, AI might be seen by some people as a potential threat, but really it's the opposite, because the question we should really be asking is, well, what could you do that adds higher value with your time? And it goes back to Mark's comment earlier about one of the great things about your organization is that you looked at technologies like AI and Gemini and things like that and didn't see it as an opportunity to reduce headcount costs. You saw it as an opportunity to transform the organization, but power human potential in ways that it wasn't done before. And I think that's been one of the many factors of the success of what you've been doing at Barton Peveril. I'm conscious of time, and you've been very generous with your time, Chris, and we've got about 25 more questions we could quite happily ask you, but we're not going to keep you to all of the questions that we could ask you. We'll have to have a virtual pub session one night, I think, and go through all these further questions. But there's a couple of sort of, I suppose, quite important ones that I'd like us to end on, really, and Mark can ask one or two and I'll ask one or two. But I'm interested in this AI world that we're talking about now, and in the context of leadership, and you're a great example of what can be achieved in this context. What kind of key skills, attitudes, or behaviors do you think that you would sort of want to share with other leaders that might be worth thinking about, that's going to be, in your view, essential for success in this AI era that we're all living through? What kind of skills do you think leaders are going to need to have?
So one of the things that I think at the moment that needs addressing is education sees other educational organisations as competition, and rightly so in a way. We're geared up. We're competing for a customer base. Gone are the days where you went to the school at the end of your road. Parental choice, student choice means that the student wants to go to the best school, the best college. So there is an element of competition there. As a consequence of that, we've started to see very closed off areas of education where we don't share IP, we don't collaborate. And I've spoken passionately to the Department for Education. I'm in the AI and Education Steering Group, and I talk about, we're developing agents. We're spending our resources to develop an agent. Now, you down the road might spend your resource with the same agent through a different provider. Now, what that means is the tech developers now are getting rich because they're getting funded twice by the public purse to develop the same solution. So I think the skills leaders are going to need moving forward, unless the government has a pot of money we don't know about, is collaboration. You start to look at economies of scale, academy trusts. Academy trusts are well positioned to benefit from bespoke solutions in AI because they can roll it out across their platforms. But typically, a lot of academy trusts aren't all Google or they're mixed Google, Microsoft, Sims versus Arbor. So there's that inconsistency there. So I think strategic thinking is going to be essential for leadership in education, because you can't afford typically to have 80% of your infrastructure of Google and 20% Microsoft, or the other way around, while chucking in a few MacBooks, maybe an iPad, and then go, let's look at some artificial intelligence. Because actually, you aren't agnostic, you're stuck everywhere. So I think strategic thinking, it's certainly become more prevalent in education in the last decade. I think it's going to continue in that vein. The competition for students, for places, the value for money, economies of scale, strategic alignment, all of these things are going to play key parts in the development of education.
Yeah, 100%. Great responses. Before I wrap up at the end, I'll give the last question to a question of your choice, Mark.
Okay, so Chris, let's just imagine it's 18 months ago, and there's somebody just like you who's wound up in a new educational establishment, and they've sat with their leadership team, and somebody like Rob Temple from your institution said, "This is over to you. We really need to sharpen up what we're doing around technology. We need to transform what it looks like, transform lives, and make this college a much better place." What are you going? If you could sit next to that person when they're back at their desk with that empty piece of paper, if you could help you 18 months ago, what would you have said to yourself?
By leading the shift, it's about £20 and it will really help you. No, look, the reality is, the reality is, I would tell them to reach out to me. You guys know I do 10 calls a week to other organisations where I talk them through how I started this journey. I didn't have that opportunity. And I was reliant on people like yourselves. Mark, our digital strategy, heavily shaped by you and your work. Jamie, our AI exploration, heavily shaped by you. The team that we work with at Applied Data Science Partners. I had to rely on the experts. And I was fortunate enough that, that support was there for me. But I would say that you're not alone. You need to reach out. You need to explore. Doing nothing is just as bad, to be perfectly honest, in my mind. And people tend to do nothing typically because of fear or lack of knowledge. So it's about being brave, being bold. But principally, as I tell anyone that talks to me about an AI journey, before you get into, can we build an agent? Should we give everyone a Gemini license? Look at your digital infrastructure. Do you have the estate that supports it? We built from a solid foundation. Yeah. Ironically, we didn't have a good digital strategy, and we needed you to help us align that. Which, when you look at how good everything was here, that is an irony. But we had a sound infrastructure. Yet we still had legacy systems, Linux-based systems. So it's about being strategic. It's start from the beginning and build from there. So I think be brave, be bold. If you're waiting for consent, it's not coming. Anybody that says we're waiting for the Department of Education to tell us what to do with AI, for example, that's not their role. When we devolved autonomy and management of educational establishments to local authorities, then MATs, then individual status, that central decision making disappeared at that point. The sitting and waiting for a centralized solution is just wasting time in my mind.
Yeah, 100%. echo that, and that's a good a good place for us to wrap up this conversation, which has been superb. Thank you so much, Chris. And just on a closing comment on what you were saying there as well, when you were talking about be bold and do big things. I remember somebody saying to me once in a leadership role that I'd been appointed to, the cavalry isn't coming, you are the cavalry. and you suddenly hit you of like, okay, time to be bold and to do these things. And I think you're a great example of that. And I think when your book comes out, Leading the Shift, AI and the Future of Operational Excellence, I've got a picture of it on the screen behind me, which is why I keep looking up there. I'll be ordering that for sure, and I'd strongly recommend it to anybody watching this, because I've had a preview of it. It is excellent. I've discussed it with Mark actually, and it's well worth picking up a copy. You've been incredibly generous as always in this session, Chris. You've been open and frank, and you are a great example of the power of networking and connections as well, because I totally echo your final point there about how important it is for leaders to be connected and to be networked, because a common characteristic of failing leadership teams and failing leaders is actually isolation. And you're an example of how to avoid that by being connected, by being out there, by connecting and making new networks and things that to transform your thinking as well. And I think that's another sort of element of your success. But you've been incredibly generous in this conversation. So on behalf of Mark, myself, and Google, and all the wider stakeholders that are involved in your work, a huge thank you from us. I'll stop the recording now. But thanks ever so much, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, Chris.